Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser from the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. And I'm joined today with my good friend, Justin Schenck, with the Growth Now Movement podcast. Justin, thanks for joining me today.
Dan, I'm excited for the conversation. I don't know if we're telling people, but this is round two. But I'm excited to dive in. And the last time we chatted, you were here at my house and we had a great time. But now we do it virtually because you are an RV living man. So excited about it.
Yes. So I'm in Florida. You're still in Pennsylvania. And yes, this is take two, so to speak, because we had some technical difficulties on our first one. So this one will be an even better podcast and what that was for sure. So appreciate you carving out the time and joining me here virtually. I know this is kind of the way you do things all the time. I was hoping when we first started this journey that, I'd get to do a lot more face-to-face like the way we did it the first time. And obviously with COVID, that's kind of changed things a little bit, but thank God for technology and Zoom and, here we are again. So again, thanks for joining me. First of all, I want to talk about, Growth Now movement. You have one of the biggest followings of podcasters out there. I think you're the number 8 podcast from Inc. magazine. Tell me a little bit about how did the podcast start, and when you started it, did you ever see it being where you are today?
Yeah. So it's obviously been a journey, right? So I've been podcasting for 5.5 years. And it's funny when I go back and think about when I was starting the show, I would tell people, yeah, I have a podcast. And their response would be, what's a podcast? And now here we are 5.5 years later, and podcasting has become such a huge medium that it's literally like, you have a podcast too, right? Because there's so many out there. And so beginning, I really had no idea what I was doing. And the original idea behind the show was I was going to interview entrepreneurs and pick their brain on how to be a better entrepreneur. Because I always had this dream and this desire to have my own business and be my own boss. And at that point under my belt, I had 3 failed businesses. And I was like, clearly I'm doing something wrong. Let me use this opportunity to connect with entrepreneurs. And that was really the original idea. And then what happened was 5 months before I launched the podcast, it was the worst day of my life. My mom lost a 20-year battle to opioids. And it was in that moment that I realized life was so much more than money and proving people wrong and all these other things. Because now, through my life's journey over the last 5.5 years and looking back, I realized that back in the day, as a younger man, I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I had a chip on my shoulder because of how I was raised and the grades I got in school. And I wanted to prove to people that I could make it. And when my mom passed away, and she was my best friend, and when she passed away, everything changed. And I realized life is about enjoying the journey, enjoying the rock bottom moments, finding ways to realize that there's hope even when the world is showing you that there's no hope. How do we find that internally? And that really became the journey for the podcast. And to answer the second part of the question, I had no idea that anybody would listen, let alone, over 2 million downloads now and getting played in 100 countries every single week. And it's evolved into my own live events and retreats and all these other things. And so I had no idea that was going to happen. But what I did was I tied this message to a purpose. And I showed up consistently every single week. And over time, people showed up and started supporting me. And I just feel really blessed and honored that it's happened.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing, is that when you really kind of tie it to a purpose is when it takes off. It's really organic, so to speak. And I think if you're focused on the purpose, everything else kind of takes care of itself. And if you're focused on, how am I going to make money at this? How am I going to make a living? I think things get a little clouded. And I think you're a perfect example of, kind of having that shift to see what was really important and, creating, a Growth Now movement. I mean, let's dig into that title a little bit deeper. Growth Now movement. I mean, it sounds good. It sounds great. What does it really mean? What is your purpose of a Growth Now movement?
Yeah. I mean, it means so much to me now. I'll tell you the origin story of it and then how it's evolved. So back 10 plus years ago, I had a company with my old co-host of the show, actually, Zach, and we put together seminars and expos that focused on personal and professional growth. And the name of the company was Jutbug. And the original idea behind the name was we wanted people to go, what's Jutbug? And we wanted them to ask that question. And we quickly realized that was really dumb. And we kind of rebranded these seminars to be Growth Now seminars. There's actually a picture of me in a suit and tie, which, as you know, that is not me. But I was in a suit and tie in front of this room, and behind me is a banner that says Growth Now Seminars. And I look like I was 7 years old. But that's where the name originally came from. And then we wanted to start the podcast. And we're like, let's just use the Growth Now name because we really fell in love with it. Because him and I were both obsessed with growth. And now it's become my motto. But it was like, let's call it the Growth Now Podcast. And I was sitting in my office the one day that I still had a day job at the time. And I was like, I don't like using the name podcast at the end. And I go, you know what? It'd be really cool if we could create a movement around this, like really have a group of people that understand the messaging of growth and making the decision now to change your life. And so I called Zach up and I was like, what about the Growth Now movement? And he goes, sure, I love it. And that's what we ran with. And so it was a very strategic, hey, we're going to talk about growth. Again, we were at that point, we were talking about just business. That was the original idea. But how do we make that growth now? How do we make the shift now instead of waiting? And that came from the idea that I just sat around and waited for so long without taking action. And the realization of like taking action now is really the only thing that's going to change anything in your life. And then of course the movement has become crazy because that was, you set an intention of creating a movement. Not really sure even what that meant at the time. But now to see the people that reach out to me, and I mean, I remember, I think people think a lot of times they think of movement and they're thinking thousands of people or millions of people or even billions of people. The reality is the movement can be 30 people. It's for me, a movement is making an impact. And I realized this pretty early on. You know, we were probably about 30, 40 episodes into the show and not really many people were listening. And I remember like, unless we had a bigger name on the show that would draw us some downloads, we were at like 60 to 100 downloads an episode. And I was like, what are we doing this for? Like in my head, I was like having that conversation. Why am I doing this? Is there really a reason? And somebody reached out to me from Japan and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And that to me is the movement. The movement is the impact you can make on one person or 100 people or 1 million people. And really like the name was a strategic, hey, people will click on this. But over time it has become so much more. And it just really resonates with people now, which I love.
Yeah, and I love that. And I actually, you know, you and I first met during the Jutbug days.
Yeah.
I remember we were at an event together at the Crown Plaza and we met, and then I think we came across each other at another chamber event. And that was it. And then all of a sudden, you know, you were at the chamber and we had a board member of the organization that I founded and was the president of, at the chamber, Karen Marsdale, who was stepping off because of the new role she was taking. And she said, hey, I want you to meet Justin. I think he'd be a great member of your board. And we got together down at Mikasa Sukasa and probably took about a 2-hour lunch or so and really, you know, kind of hit it off. So it's kind of funny, you know, as you look back, you know, we had those kind of couple chance meetings and then all of a sudden you're serving on the board of my nonprofit and still serving on that board as I'm out traveling around the country. But, you know, we really did connect immediately. And, you know, I think, you know, we're really kind of cut from the same mold, you know, not knowing it at the time of that 2-hour lunch, but obviously we both have had very deep connections with our mothers, who, you know, neither are with us anymore. So I guess we were kind of mama's boys to an extent. So we kind of drew off of each other from that to a little bit. But it's neat, you know, as Sandy and I are doing what we're doing and I have some time to kind of reflect, you know, the times where you wonder about the people that cross your paths and why they're there. You don't really know it at the time, but as you look back, you're like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. So, I love what you're doing with the podcast and with the movement. And, I love the fact that you looked at it and you're like, look, if I'm helping one person or a million a million people, I'm still helping somebody. And, for me, that's always one of my biggest struggles is, like throughout my entire life, I've always said, hey, as long as I get one kid to change their life, it's good enough for me. But the truth is it's not. Make a big impact. So it's tough sometimes to swallow that pill, where it's like, look, it really is one person at a time. At what point in your life did you, kind of make that, swallow that pill that it's okay if we're taking the small steps? They don't have to be big steps.
Yeah, I think it was an evolution over time. The realization through, and honestly, this is over the last 5.5 years. It began with the deep conversations I was having on the podcast. And when you reflect on over 380 episodes or whatever I'm at now, and you reflect back on and you start to connect the dots and you go, what is it about these individuals that drew me to them? And look, there's people from all different walks of life on my podcast. People always highlight the celebrities or the massive influencers or or the comedians or whoever I've had on the show. But realistically, every single person has impacted me in some way, shape, or form. And so over the last 5.5 years, I got really clear on a couple things. I got really clear on the idea that the destination is not the answer to anybody's happiness. You can set all the goals you want in your life, and I highly encourage it. A goal is a great way to understand your direction. Like my goal is to always grow my show, always grow my events, always grow all these things that I'm building because that gives me a direction, that gives me a drive. But I also know when I get there, that's not going to be the answer to my fulfillment and my happiness. And so it really began with the understanding when I started to hit these goals of, Inc. magazine, and then the big names on my show, and then the first event. And I look back and I go, they were all great goals, but there were certain moments where I thought that was going to be the answer. Like this next thing was going to be the thing that's going to set me up for life where I'm going to never have to worry and I'm going to be happy and all these things. And that's just not the case. And a great example of this, I had a guy on my podcast named Pete Evick. He's the lead guitarist for the Bret Michaels band. Really, really great human being. And he had told a story how he grew up a Poison fan. So he grew up like a huge fan of Bret Michaels, and his dream was to play the guitar to a sold out concert in this arena in his hometown. It's like 36,000 people. He's like, that's it. That was it. Once I got that, I'd make it. That was literally his whole life. That was in his head. And so he ended up playing with Bret Michaels, being his lead guitarist, and they played that arena, and he walked off the stage and he said, I've never felt so empty in my life. And so that was a big aha moment for me to really put the pieces together of like, I knew that wasn't the answer, but like, what does that really mean? And I realized that it's about incremental wins because that's the only thing that fulfill us, right? We need to constantly grow. So I focus on 1% every single day. I've embraced the idea that I'm not going to change the world overnight. That's going to take time, and it's a great goal to have. But I'm not going to change the world overnight. And whether I hit my goals or not, I understand that I have to enjoy the process and the journey. And I do that by focusing on the 4 pillars of my life, which has really kind of taken over our retreats that we host. And that's incremental wins in business, relationship, wellness, and spirituality every single day, just that little bit. And I've found out that's where my fulfillment lies. And for so many others that I've coached and helped at this point, that's where it lies right there, is understanding if we can pour into those 4 pillars every single day, not only are we going to be happy, but we're also going to reach our goals as a byproduct to a byproduct of focusing on those important things in those 4 pillars.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I know, there's a lot of things you just kind of have to trust the process and know that you're making an impact and you're doing things. But then, tell me a little bit about the feeling you get when you do see it come together. So for an example, on our way down to Florida this time, Sandy and I stopped in Virginia to see Chuck Balsamo and his wife, Emily, who I wouldn't have any idea who Chuck is if it wasn't for you and your live event. And Chuck also hooked us up down at the Dream Center in Texas when we were down there to do some hurricane relief, and we're going to end up spending a lot of time at the Dream Center this winter. So when you kind of see it come together, what's the feeling that you get personally?
I think more than anything, like with what I'm building and the people that I surround myself, I'm just super humbled by all of it. I mean, there's definitely an excitement and a joyous thing, and I am one to celebrate my little wins. By the way, like I think I'm not one to beat myself up over any of it. Like I took a vacation after my first live event. Like as a congratulations to myself, I went to Chicago for a week with Lauren. But you know, I think it's funny, like when I think about the goals that I set and the intentions behind them, something I do every single day is a pretty deep visualization process. And the visualization process will literally take me into that moment that I am shooting for, to that goal, to that end result, to that whatever. And I remember with my live event for the first one, it was 160 people from all over the country in Canada. And I visualized it to the T of the kind of music, the kind of people in the audience, how are they going to react? What kind of speakers am I going to have? Like I visualized it all. And it completely panned out exactly the way I had visualized it. And somebody asked me the morning of, hey, are you nervous? And I looked at them and I go, no, I've done it 10,000 times. And so I think at this point, because I get so clear in my visualizations and my daily habits and my practices, that when I get there, it's awesome. But I can live in the moment and be super humble and super present because it's already happened. And that's just the reality of my life. Like I've got goals to sell out an arena filled with 6,000 people for Growth Now Summit Live. And when I get there, I understand, number one, I understand it's going to take time. But number two, when I get there, it's going to be like it was meant to be. And so there's a mixture of excitement and just knowingness and all that other stuff, which is kind of a weird mix of emotions as you go through it.
Yeah, and I love the visualization that you talk about, because I mean that's so important. You know, again, obviously I'm a sports guy, and you know those are things I would talk to my players about all the time when I was coaching. You know, hey, when you go up to the plate and you got runners on second and third with 2 outs and the game on the line, you know, visualize yourself hitting the ball to the gap to score those 2 runs and take the lead and stuff like that. And you know, it's something that I think has always been very prominent in the sports world is visualization. It seems like it's becoming more and more prominent in the business world as well. You know, what do you think is driving that there seem to be a lot more people who are really grasping the importance of visualization?
I mean, I realized a long time ago, some of the greatest analogies in business are sports related. So I imagine a lot of it could come from the idea that these sports guys have taken it into the business world. There's a guy, and I forget his name. He was like the mindset coach for like Michael Jordan and all these guys. And I wish I remembered his name. But Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, like all the top elite guys, he worked with them on that kind of thing, the visualization, the mental toughness, the mindset that you need to do whatever. This guy now speaks at business conferences and works with CEOs across the board. And so I imagine he was a big catalyst to take that into the business space, but it just works. Like, I think that when you realize like, oh wait, this isn't just for draining baskets or hitting home runs. This is for goal setting. This is for understanding, like, honestly, like I've used visualization before I went into a tough conversation with a loved one to be like, how am I visualizing how they're going to feel? How am I going to react to that? And it's kept my blood pressure down. Like there's literal visualization is so powerful because it puts you in that as long as you do it right, it puts you in that moment and you'll be prepared for anything. Like nothing's going to stop you from, number one, executing, but number two, being prepared for any type of misfire. So, I mean, I imagine there's a lot of influencers that have brought it into the business space. And since it works and it's a legitimate thing, like I'm seeing it more and more every single day too, every single conversation I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, man. It's so important. Let's talk a little bit about your retreats that you're doing. You did one a couple months ago. You mentioned a little bit, you touched on the 4 pillars, and that's really one of the things that the retreats really dig into. Tell me a little bit more about the philosophy of those 4 pillars.
Yeah, again, going to the four pillars, and I'll say them again. It's business/finances, because we have people that have a day job or are independently wealthy that have attended these things or are going to be attending these things. So business/finances, relationships, wellness, and spirituality. And I realize these are really the catalysts for success and fulfillment in your life. And so what we focus on in the retreats is, how do we tap into our fullest potential in all four of those pillars so we can live the life that we truly desire, internally, externally, and everything else in between. There's so much power in human connection. And I think, especially through COVID, I think that we've lost a lot of that human connection, and being able to do it back in March. And now things are opening up as we're having this conversation, but doing it back in March and being able to bring people together, we felt that human connection and the power with that as well. So the retreats are something that hits on so many levels. Number one, it gives a person an escape from their daily grind. It gives them a couple of days to breathe. Number two, it puts them in a room with the right people, right? We talk about relationships, and the reason that is one of the four pillars, and I almost want to say it's probably the most important pillar, is because we need to make sure we're constantly surrounded by those right people. And so we literally put together an atmosphere where you're guaranteed to be surrounded by the right people. And actually the one we're doing in New Orleans here in October, where we're bringing guest speakers like Mike Kim and like these literal elite individuals and elite entrepreneurs and leaders and thought leaders to teach and also hang out with us and really help level up those circles. The spirituality piece is led by a mutual friend of ours, Adam Kenderdine, who we know him mostly as a coffee and donuts guy, but what most people don't realize is that he's actually a medium and a psychic who works with angels and all these other things to be able to do readings and forecast lives. And he does life activations, and he's doing that stuff at the retreat this year. Because really at the end of the day, and here's what I say about spirituality, because some people will hear that and go, all right, I'm going to turn this podcast off now because Justin's going off his rockers. He's talking about his best friend working with angels. Here's what we need to realize about spirituality. We need to, number one, first acknowledge that there's somebody or something, whatever you want to say, that's more powerful than us. There's something greater than us. We're not the most important thing. Number two, we're all energy, right? You talked about us connecting 10 years ago and then, 5 years ago and now this. It's because our energies were meant to be connected, right? And so how I look at spirituality is, we must do the work necessary, whether it's prayer, meditation, getting aura cleanses, clearing of whatever, to make sure that the energy around us is flowing with us instead of against us. And so that's something that we really work on at the retreat with every single person there, to make sure when they leave, they're operating at such an optimum level energetically that nobody will say no. Here's some crazy things that have happened after the retreat from the attendees. One person ended a relationship that wasn't healthy for them. Finally got the courage to do that. Number two, somebody up and moved to the beach. They've always wanted to live at the beach. It gave them the energy and the encouragement to do what they wanted to do. She now lives at the beach near her son. And number three, a third person bought her a vacation home that she was putting off. Not that she couldn't financially afford it, but she was like, what am I doing? That's crazy. That's crazy. And it gave her the ability to do that. And so we really focus on the idea of like, we want to make sure that you're running on an optimum level, specifically in the four pillars, and we set the space up perfectly for that. And on top of it, it's in New Orleans this year, which at the end of the day is just a ton of fun. So that's always a good thing too.
And I think when you're talking about those four pillars, a lot of times I like to kind of put it into an analogy of it's four tires. We're cars, and all four of our tires need to be inflated to the same air pressure. And if just one of those is out of kilter, if you got three of them that are running on 55 pounds of pressure and one that's running on 30, like there's a problem. So I love the fact that you talk about how it's all intertwined, because it really isn't, focusing on just one of those pillars. If you're just focused on business and that's your driving force, you're going to be left with other emptiness. I think it goes back to the guitar player. When he finally achieved what he thought was going to bring him happiness, he walked off the stage and was still empty. And I think, that's one of the things, with Sandy and I on this journey here. I put in a ton of hours at the foundation and we were changing lives, and we were doing work that matters. But at the end of the day, there was this calling that there was something more to be had, because I was filling a lot of other people's emotional tanks, but I was draining my own, you know? And I think on take one of this, we talked about how you can't fill from an empty cup. And that's kind of where I personally was getting to. And I think that's why when you focus on the 4 pillars, you can't ignore any of those pillars. They've all got to have the same type of attention and the same type of understanding of how important all 4 of them they are. So I think, what you're doing at the retreats is really awesome. You're getting ready to start up live events again. Like I said, I was at your first one a couple years ago. You had to go virtual the past couple years because of COVID. Now you're getting back into that live event space. Tell me about, just that shift of live to virtual to, I think I'm going to go live. No, it's got to stay virtual. Oh, okay. Now we're finally going live. And then give yourself a little plug on when this next live event's coming up and how people can register for it.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to go back to, you were talking about the 4 tires, and I love that analogy. And the one thing I always say because I'm a visual person. So I'm like, if you don't make this a visual thing, I'm not understanding what you're saying. So I love that you did that. But I talk about the 4 pillars. And what I say is on top of those 4 pillars, you have a glass plate. And on top of that glass plate is everything you hold dear, whether it's your significant other, your kids, your whatever it is. It's what you hold dear. The issue is a lot of times people go head first into one of the pillars because they think that's what's going to satisfy the things that they're lacking in their life. And that pillar grows. Cool. You're doing the thing that you're focusing on. But if those 3 other pillars aren't there, that plate's going to tip and everything's going to shatter. And so, a great example of this is Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates recently getting divorced, because they head first into their business. So that tower grew and their relationship didn't. So I loved your analogy as well, especially you being the RV guy, like you have to go with the tires. Like that's on point. But yeah, so getting back into the live events has been, first of all, the live events, that's what feeds my soul. When I set out to do it in 2019, it was a labor of love, not knowing what was going to happen. But I knew bringing people together was where I needed to be, whether it's at a retreat or, with hundreds of people. I knew that's where I needed to be. And so, COVID happened and everything kind of shut down and I had to make a pivot. And it was tough for me because I'm on Zoom all the time, like you mentioned. Like, this is my life, to have a virtual conversation with people for my podcast. And the live event was the idea that, hey, I've got this great opportunity in my life to connect with some of the top people in the world. First year, like Fabio Viviani, Chuck Balsamo, whoever else, and Sarah Centrella and Albie Manzo. And I look at that and I was like, now let me take that opportunity that I have and bring it to other people. Because as you saw, my speakers aren't just there to speak and get off the stage and leave. They hung out. They were at the after party. They were at all these things. And so it was really about building community and building that movement that we talked about. And so when the virtual thing happened, I was like, I'm not doing virtual. I was real bitter about it. I was like, I'm not doing this. I have to stick to my guns. And I ended up doing it just to serve. The first time I did it was to serve my audience and give them something. Because at this point we were a year and a half after it was supposed, I think it was a year and a half. No, 6 months after the event was supposed to happen, we did the first virtual one because I'm like, I want to give them something. And it also, from a business standpoint, it was, hey, let's keep them in the loop. Like, let's keep them excited. And it was great, man. The feedback was phenomenal. That people did find a way to connect and have a good time and learn. And then I was like, you know what, let's see when we can do the next one. And I was like, nope, it's going to be too far out. I have to do another one. And so I did a second virtual event. Very similar results. We had more people the second time, but very similar results from the standpoint of people connecting, learning, all that stuff. But there was something missing. And so when the world finally said, hey, you can do live events again, I was like, yes. Now, by the way, this is not, I'm saying the pretty version of this, right? Like, this was not easy by any means. I lost a ton of money on the first virtual event. And part of me, I do tend to be that person that can get a chip on my shoulder when I fail at something. So the second one was more of me going, okay, how do I make this a successful thing? And I was able to make some money off of it. But in between, I was searching for outdoor venues. I was like looking for places that would accept us to have this event, because I knew there was a community that was willing to step up and say, hey, let's all be together. Because I was polling people in my group. I was doing all these things. And so with that being said, I'm happy to say that finally May of 2022 is Growth Now Summit Live. We've rebranded a little bit, but Growth Now Summit Live, the speaker lineup is going to be absolutely ridiculous. Right before we hopped on here, I just announced one of the movement makers is a 4-time Emmy winner, YouTuber, television host, Chris Van Vliet is going to be there. And you know, sharing his knowledge and wisdom about business and life. And he's got a great mindset on so many things. And there will be more announcements coming soon, which, you know, I will say this, I don't toot my horn often, but my speaker lineup is always unmatched. It's something you'll never see anywhere else. And I make the event super affordable. Ticket prices right now for early bird start at $97, depending on where you want to be. I highly recommend the VIP ticket so you can come to the VIP party. But either way, I've rented out one of the coolest venues of all time in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, called Rock Lidditz, which is an entire campus that has everything we need on there. 3 restaurants, a brewery, a hotel, the place where we'll have the event. All that stuff is right on campus. And it's where like Taylor Swift gets ready for her concerts and all that stuff. And so with that being said, I'm really excited to finally get back and high five people and hug them and have a good time. And it really is like a day-long rock concert for entrepreneurs and forward thinkers. And I just can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, and it is. Like I said, I can attest. I mean, it's a great event. You're in the room with a bunch of like-minded people. You know, like I said to you a little while ago, and if it's not for your event, I don't even know who Chuck is. And it's funny. I was telling him this story, and I don't think I've ever told you this story, but I am very introverted by nature. You know, I'm not the guy to, you know, walk up to somebody out of the blue. If I go to a networking event, like if you and I go to a networking event, I'm with you the whole time, man. You know, now if you introduce me to people, I'm cool with it. But you know, Chuck, I would say, is probably the opposite of of an introvert. Yes. He's very extroverted, and he came up to me at the VIP event the night before and was like, "Hey, I'm Chuck. This is Emily. Nice to meet you. You know, we're from Virginia. Who are you?" And I was just like, I want to know parts of the conversation. You know, I'm just like, I'm Dan, a friend of Justin's, yada, yada, yada. Let me go find somebody I know. And then I heard him speak the next day. And I was like, oh, man, did I ever blow it? Like, I could have hung out with this dude last night, you know? But as it turns out, we hung out at his house in Virginia instead of a few, you know, year and a half later. So, but, you know, those are the type of people that you're going to meet at these events. So I definitely highly recommend it to people to carve out some time in their schedule to do it, because you will absolutely not be sorry that you signed up for it. And I, like you, man, I love live events. I mean, you know, the organization, we ran tournaments, and I think that the chaos of a live event, and it's a chaos that only those who are in the midst of it realize, you know, like for me on the outside of your event, man, it ran silky smooth. But I'm sure you behind the curtains, there was all kinds of stuff that you're just juggling. And that's the way it was, you know, when we do a tournament or we do a live event. You know, we use the old, I think it was a Dial soap commercial, you know, never let them see a sweat. And, you know, we could be kind of at each other's throats behind the scenes, like, hey, this has got to get done. This isn't happening. Then somebody come up like, hey, how's it going? Everything's great, you know? So I do love the chaos, you know, the organized chaos, I like to call it, of a live event and seeing it come together. There's definitely an adrenaline rush that goes along with that.
We're a different breed, man. When people ask me like, hey, or when they say to me, I'm thinking about doing a live event, immediately I'm like, don't, unless your purpose and your heart is fully in it, do not do it. It's something really, really hard to pull off. You know, just to get by. Look, I have this podcast that gets played all over the world. And I thought I was going to announce this event and be like, okay, cool. Sold 100 tickets like that. No, I sold 160 tickets one phone call at a time, hopping on calls, being like, you got to be there, get there. Come on, let's go. And I mean, there's just so much to it. I think the main thing is making sure, and you know this, like anything else, like making sure you have the right people in place to create the success that you need, right? Whether it's for my event, the light and sound guys, or the right food for people, or, who's at the door taking tickets, how they representing you, and doing all that stuff from the standpoint of, if you have the right team, it makes it a lot easier. There were definitely, it's funny, it went off pretty smoothly. There were a couple things that I got fired up about, like you just said, like, what's going on? This has to get fixed. But not much. And I was really blessed that actually went down like that. So we'll see how it goes in 2022. Every live event's a new adventure. Virtually, apparently every time I spoke at my virtual event, I was a blurry mess. So even virtually they have technical issues. So it's really about making sure that you have the right people. And look, I've built a community that is extremely forgiving. Like, I said, okay, we're not doing this event, and I have no idea when we're doing it again. And not one person has reached out and said, hey, can I get my money back? Not one. So they're an extremely understanding and accepting group of people. So I highly recommend that too. Build a community of understanding people who aren't going to be a pain. I just feel blessed to have them in my corner.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, there's just so many moving parts in a live event. And I mean, your speaker lineup alone, somebody's plane gets hung up, or if they're driving in, the car breaks down, or, that can throw a complete, storm into the whole thing.
Dude, here's a story I've never shared publicly before. You talk about, because you just kind of triggered this memory. So Fabio Viviani, who was the biggest name of all the speakers that came in, and I mean, the story behind my connection with him, and I saw him speak, and I was like, I need to be friends with that guy, and now I get to call him a friend. But he's one of the busiest men on the planet. He will literally fly in somewhere to open a restaurant, open it up, be there for 18 hours, and right when he leaves there, he gets back on his plane, back on a plane. He doesn't have his own plane yet, but it gets back on a plane and flies back home to his family because he wants to be there when they wake up. Like, this guy is that person, and then flies back out the next afternoon to go somewhere else. And so he came in around 11:30 the night before the event. He landed in Harrisburg, got a car, came into to the hotel. And it was funny. I was standing in the hotel bar, and he came up behind me, like slapped my shoulders. And then I was up till 1:30, and then I had to wake up at 4:30. But he ended up speaking and then having to fly right back out. But he was opening a restaurant in Oklahoma City around the same time that my event was happening. And I announced him as the speaker. He reached out to me 2 months later, and he goes, hey man, we need to talk. I was like, oh no. So I call him, and I was like, hey, what's up? And he's like, so they pushed back the opening of my hotel, or of my restaurant in Oklahoma City, and it's the weekend of your event. And whenever I open up a brand new restaurant like this, I have to be there all weekend. Like, I can't not be there. And I was like, like, you're the big name, you're the big draw, like, you're the dude. And so I was immediately like, okay, what can we do? Can we dial you in virtually? Can we pre-record something? What can we figure out? Thank goodness restaurant openings get pushed back a lot, and it got pushed back again. But you talk about all the moving parts of, like, okay, my biggest name couldn't even come speak. I had a speaker who ended up getting a lung disease, and she couldn't even speak at the event. So, like, there was a whole speaker that was missing, but you run as if that's the way it's supposed to go. And that's just the reality. But it's really, in the live event space, is being calm whenever you possibly can, and being okay with whatever possibly can go wrong. And that's just the reality, man. As I had a reoccurring dream leading up to it, that I was standing at the registration table and nobody showed up. So thank God that didn't happen. If that happened, I couldn't have remained calm, but it all turned out okay in the end.
I'll tell you, man, I would have some crazy dreams leading up to our events. The first banquet we ever did, we had Al Oliver come in to speak. And the night before, I had a dream that we all got to the banquet, and we're all standing around. We're like, all right, where's Al? And it's like, I thought you were picking him up at the airport. No, I thought you were picking him up there. And I'm having this dream that everybody, the whole group of us forgot to pick up the speaker at the
oh
airport.
my
but
gosh.
as it turned out, we didn't forget him. He got there. It was a great event. So, but I can relate to that, man. I would have some crazy dreams leading up to events sometimes that you explain them to people and they just look at you like you have three heads. It's like, look,
Yeah.
unless you ran an event, you don't really know what we're going through.
It's true. It's true.
So we're just about out of time. One thing I want to touch base with you a little bit before we sign off here is I think another thing that you and I have in common is you're not technically a step parent yet. I don't know what you and Lauren's plans are, but I'm a step parent, and I think we've had some other conversations around that a little bit, but tell me how your philosophy with life in general has helped you, raise two kids that aren't your own, help raise two kids that aren't your own.
Man, that's a really great question. Like really, really great question. And I think when I think about it, life isn't always what you expect. It's not the picture you paint. It's not the fairy tale that as a kid, I thought I was going to be married by the time I was 23, have kids by the time I was 25 and do that thing. Right. But I think the greatest lesson for me is to understand that I chose the greatest partner I could possibly choose in life, in love. Now we do business together as well. Chose the greatest partner ever. And did I ever think I'd have stepkids? No, I wasn't even sure I wanted kids, to be completely honest with you. But I realized that when you have the right people around you, any challenge that you face or an obstacle that you don't, and I don't want to call the kids obstacles because they're not, but I don't know what else to say, but an obstacle that you didn't expect, you can get through pretty much anything, right? Back to that relationship pillar. You have the right relationships, everything's going to be okay. And so the understanding that I know the support system's there. I know it's okay that I'm not perfect. I know that it's okay that I'm not always going to get the thing right. But I do know that as well. I know that unconditional love wins over many, many, many mistakes. People look at me and what I went through with my family, and part I didn't share here is like my mom had a 20-year opioid addiction that started when I was 12. And my dad spent time in jail. And so when you look at that, people would say, you've got no shot, right? They say if your parent's an addict, you have a 50% chance of being an addict. If your parent's in jail, you have a 50% chance of ending up in jail. That should say I'm 100% screwed. And when I look back at my life and people ask me all the time, like, what makes you any different? I realized that my parents loved me unconditionally and supported me in all my crazy ideas. Yeah, they couldn't figure it out for themselves, but I was able to learn from their mistakes. They loved me unconditionally. And they supported me. And I think that was the biggest thing. And so if I can be that for these kids, throughout the rest of their life, hopefully, that's the best I can do. And at the end of the day, I think that's the best anybody can do. Because I'm certainly not perfect. It's one of the hardest things I've ever tackled. But it's also one of the most rewarding. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that philosophy of understanding like unconditional love can overcome a lot of your faults. Then I'm going to win every single day knowing that and just keep approaching that in that manner, actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. So like you said, it is one of those things it's incredibly rewarding. I know, my mom came from a very mixed family where her parents were divorced. So she would always refer to her siblings as his, hers, and ours because they both remarried and both had additional kids. And never in my lifetime did I ever hear my mom refer to any of her siblings as half brother or sister or step brother or sister. It was all just, this is my family. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the many things that she taught me is that, family isn't always about the blood that's running through your veins, and I think if you go into that thought process, it helps you get through the day, a lot easier, without a doubt, that, again, it doesn't have to be my blood, but you're still my family. So I think that's a great way to go through it. And like you said, having the support of a partner as well is so important for sure. So, all right. Well, hey, that brings us to our final question. As you know, I ask all my guests one final question, because the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the Michael Franti song Gloria, where the opening lyrics say, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So what are one of the little things that Justin Schenk's doing every day to help make the world a better place?
You know what? First time you asked me this, I was like, oh my God, that's such a good question, because it is. But now I know, because we've already done this. But I don't remember what I said. And so I really don't remember what I said. And I think for me, obviously I try and make an impact wherever I possibly can. As a matter of fact, I love the saying ROI, return on impact, right? Like, so every single thing I do is driven by the impact I want to make. But I think the most powerful thing that I do to make some change in the world is, I end every single conversation with the same question, whether that's somebody I just met for coffee because they bumped into me and said, hey, do you want to get a coffee? Or it's, Ed Milet or Bert Kreischer. I end every single conversation with the same question. And that is, if there's anything I can do to support you, let me know. And I say that from a genuine place every single time. And I mean it. Like, if they reached out and said, hey, help me, I need help with this, or, hey, do you think you could do this for me? As long as I can, and it doesn't damage me in any way, I'll do it. And I think that's the simplest thing that anybody can do, is to finish a conversation or a meeting or a whatever with somebody and say, hey, if there's anything I can ever do to help you, let me know. And say it from a genuine place and not expect anything in return. I think the world would be a better place. I mean, exponentially better. And so that would be the thing that I do. And I encourage others to do the same.
No, I love that answer. I love that answer. And it's funny because the next line in that song, you and I talked about a little bit, not specifically, but the next line of that song goes, but sometimes not fast enough for me. And that's one of the things that, again, even now in my early 50s, I'm still learning, to take those baby steps and to do it one day at a time. And, again, this journey that Sandy and I are on has, certainly helped me be much more in the moment than what I ever was before. I was always planning ahead, and we still do. Obviously, we're still, we're looking at where we're going to be location wise for the rest of the calendar year and that sort of stuff. But by the same token, we're very much in the moment that if something changes those plans, we're very fluid with it, and we just kind of go with it. So, it's funny, I mentioned the first two lines of the song, but I don't really mention the third one, which is probably the one I've got the most trouble with at times. A lot of times things just don't happen fast enough for me. So, but hey, man, I love that we were able to carve out the time. Sorry that we had technical issues and I had to get you back on here, but I think this conversation was definitely better than the last one. So, like I said, everything's always meant to be. And, I don't know if we're going to be in Pennsylvania in May, but if we are, we'll definitely make it to the event. We're still trying to work our schedule out for October. So hopefully we can get there, but if not, we'll definitely be there in spirit for both of those events. But again, I love your friendship, the connections you've made, and listening to guests on the podcast. You're doing a great job, and you definitely have started the movement. So you're accomplishing your goals without a doubt.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm super grateful for your friendship and any conversation we have, whether we decide to hit record or not. I'm grateful for it. So thank you so much.
No doubt. And folks out there listening, be sure to check out my blogs, my other podcasts at danclouser.com. Justin, thanks again for joining me today. I really appreciate the time.